Well, hi and welcome to part 8 of my series, Where are the Lost Tribes of Israel? This is Dr. Michael Bogart with Aspect Ministries. In the previous parts of this series, we have been exploring the mystery of ancient Israel's northern tribes who were seemingly lost to history for the past 2,700 years. Our quest has led us from their original land in what is now northern Israel and the adjoining Palestinian and Jordanian areas, into several regions in Asia and Africa, as well as possibly into Europe. We've considered plausible connections with peoples in countries like Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, as well as in India, China, Russia, Ethiopia, and beyond. In this video, I want to consider lost Israelites among an ancient group of people that many people have overlooked. Once we've done that, we might be able to make connections with their modern descendants. So who is this overlooked group of people that may at least partially include lost Israelites? Well, I'm thinking of the Phoenicians. So who were these Phoenicians? Well, they were great seafarers and merchants, trading all sorts of commodities throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Contrary to common belief, though, the Phoenicians were not a clearly defined nation or ethnicity. Instead, they were a mixed group of people who lived along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea in ancient times. And today, this eastern Mediterranean region is called the Levant. And the Greeks traded heavily with peoples of the Levant region and seem to have called them all by the descriptive term Phoenicians. Now, why did they call them that? The term comes from the Greek word phoenix, which describes the color purple or reddish purple. The Greek term Phoenician seems to have referred to any merchant from this region who brought that purple dye that was so desired by the Greeks and others. So the Greeks lumped anyone coming from the coast of Lebanon, Syria, or Israel under the term Phoenician, the purple people. But the ancient people that the Greeks called Phoenicians, they didn't think of themselves as Phoenicians. They didn't think of themselves as a single unified group at all. Instead, they would have described themselves more in terms of their cities. We're Tyrians, we're Sidonians, we're Dorians, etc. And of course, Tyre and Sidon were the major cities of the region. They had their origins among the Canaanite people who had settled on the Mediterranean coast long before the Israelites came into the land under Joshua. But these more famous cities weren't the only ports that shipped goods from the Middle East all over the Mediterranean world. There was Dor in the Israelite territory of Manasseh, Joppa in the territory of Dan, and Akko in the tribal lands allotted to Asher. In Joshua 21:24-31, the tribe of Asher was also originally allotted territory that included Tyre and Sidon in the north of the lands that they ended up conquering and fully settling. But according to Judges 1:32, in those more northerly areas, the Asherites lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land because they did not drive them out. So even in the traditionally understood heartland of the Phoenicians, in what is now Lebanon, there were large settlements of Israelites from the tribe of Asher. A few chapters later in chapter 4, the book of Judges records an Israelite victory over a group of Canaanites led by Jabin and Sisera. The Israelites were led by the judge Deborah and her military commander Baruch. In chapter 5, Deborah sings a victory song that lists several tribes that rallied to the defense of Israel and together defeated those Canaanites. She also makes mention of what can only be described as a list of shame that includes other tribes that failed to heed the call. Here are a few stanzas of Deborah's song. Referring to the tribe of Reuben, she sings, "Why did you stay among the sheep pens? To hear the whistling for the flocks?" In the districts of Reuben, there was much searching of heart. Referring to Gad and the eastern portion of Manasseh, she sings, "Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan." Referring to the coastal tribes of Dan and Asher, she says, "And Dan, why did he linger by the ships? Asher remained on the coast and stayed in his coves." So you can see that the Bible shows the coastal tribes as being far more interested in their shipping businesses than in Israel's national concerns. Now, from the Bible's perspective, they were still Israelites, but they weren't participating much in its national life by this time or in the defense of Israel as a whole. So from a Greek perspective, there really wouldn't have been much difference between the Israelite merchants and the Canaanites who brought the same products. They all spoke a similar language, they were engaged in the same kind of trade, and they hailed from the same general part of the world. They were all just the purple people, Phoenicians. Okay, so what? Well, just this. It could very well be that included among the people known as Phoenicians, there were actually a fair number of Israelites. As mentioned in previous videos, most of the people of the northern tribes were deported by the Assyrians in the late 700s BC. But some of them may have been spared the deportations because they were scattered among the coastal peoples whom the Assyrians just simply left alone. Here's something else to consider. The Phoenicians were famous for their colonization of many parts of the Mediterranean world. Carthage, located on the coast of North Africa, is perhaps the most famous example, but there were colonies in modern-day Turkey, many of the Mediterranean islands like Crete, Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, as well as in Spain. And you may be surprised that there was most probably a modest Phoenician enclave in the southwestern part of Britain, where they traded for the lucrative tin produced there. Tin was highly valued and used in many items, including in the manufacture of the alloy we know as bronze. Okay, who would have been involved in those Phoenician colonizing expeditions? Well, I don't think that it would be such a huge stretch of the imagination that these seagoing Israelite merchants would have been involved in some way. Actually, I think it would be much more of a stretch to think that they were not involved. If Israelites were involved, some would probably have settled in these far-flung colonies, and as time went by, of course, they would have become part of the local population. Now, this is a tad off topic, but it bears mentioning that nearly all experts in the field of ancient languages will say that what we think of as Hebrew was the first alphabetic form of writing in history. But these scholars and experts will also say that it really wasn't the Hebrews who invented the writing system. Couldn't be, because when the Greeks borrowed it to make their Greek alphabet, they adapted it from the Phoenicians. But let's think for a minute. If what I'm finding is true, then it begs the question, which Phoenicians did the Greeks borrow the writing system from? Was it from the Israelite Phoenicians, or was it from the Canaanite Phoenicians? Who knows? But some little-known discoveries do shed some light on the question. There is some overlooked evidence that the earliest form of the Hebrew script, known as Proto-Semitic, did not originate in the Levant on the Mediterranean coast. The earliest examples of Proto-Semitic script have been found specifically in places where the Egyptians used slaves in their mines. Instead, it was much further south in the Sinai Peninsula. Egyptian slaves who wrote with an early form of the Proto-Semitic script. Well, let me see. Who are the most famous of Egypt's slaves? That's right, the Hebrews or Israelites. It's just something to think about. All right, if all of this is true, then who would be the modern-day descendants of these coastal Israelites that were included among those known to history as the Phoenicians? Well, of course, it would be people in modern-day Lebanon, as well as any of the people descended from the Phoenician colonists in their various places along the Mediterranean. But it probably isn't as simple as saying that all Lebanese have Israelite blood, or that there's Israelite blood among modern Tunisians who are descendants of the Carthaginians, or among people in parts of Spain where the Phoenician colonies were. Keep in mind that over the past 2,700 years, people have moved around extensively. There have been conquests, plagues, and migrations that have hugely rearranged the populations of these regions. However, I do think it would be at least safe to say that 21st century Lebanese, Tunisians, Spaniards, and even some people of the southwestern British Isles may have some Israelite blood. Okay, that's enough for this video. I'll wrap up this series next time in part 9 as we continue to explore what happened to these lost tribes of Israel. This is Dr. Michael Bogart with Aspect Ministries. We'll see you then.